Welcome to the Utah School Technology Inventory. This one was conducted in 2017 and published in January 2018. They're in the midst of doing a new one, so we should have new data soon, and when that comes out, I encourage you to take the time to take a look at it. For now, we're going to use the data here, and my hope here is that you'll really get a realistic sense of what technology will be available to you in the schools and the district that you want to teach in, so that you can start planning for what will be available to you. I hope as you see this data that you'll actually be kind of surprised and excited at the amount of technology that's available, but I also want you thinking critically about how that technology is being used. So I'm just going to take a few minutes to show you how to navigate through the report, and then I've got some questions that I want you to start finding answers to as you go through the report yourself. So clearly I'm not going to make you read this entire thing. It's exceptionally long, but I just want to show you a couple of things within it. Okay, so just generally how you would navigate this. You've got the cover page, there's an overview of what they did and why, and then there's your table of contents, so you can kind of see where the most important information is going to be. We're going to be particularly concerned with a few pieces. You are welcome to read the executive summary. That's kind of the narrative version of what they found out, what their results were. If you come down into the inventory results section, that will give you a little bit more detail along with visualizations, graphs and charts and things like that for each of these categories of information. And I'm just going to explain really quickly what these categories are, and then I'll jump you into some of the content. So first, they're going to talk about computing devices that are available for the students, what kinds of devices, and how those devices are deployed, meaning does each student get one that they carry around with them all day, what we call one-to-one, or are they available on carts in the teachers' classrooms for the students to use? What does that availability look like? The report also talks about Wi-Fi access, which is actually a really important measure because it tells us how reliable the internet access will be in the school. So the more Wi-Fi hotspots they have and the better the technologies are that they're using for Wi-Fi, the stronger the Wi-Fi signals will be, the less it'll drop, those kinds of things. It also gets really interesting when you start looking at how old the devices are at different schools and school districts and across the state. And then you can see what kinds of software products are being used by Utah schools. And this shifts every year, of course, but when we see some of the trends, I frankly am a little disappointed at some of what is being used. There is a good section too in that inventory results, so I encourage you to take a look at it, about some of the instructional software needs. What do teachers want to have access to or feel they need access to? Then they talk about the number of support staff that are available for the district and some comparisons between our more traditional school districts and the charter schools across Utah, which are kind of held separately even though they're both public school institutions. Okay, so that's kind of a breakdown of each of the topics within the report. If you are way into this kind of thing, you can look at the methodology that they use to get the data. Very exciting. And then they have a conclusion. We're actually going to spend most of our time in the appendix. So again, I encourage you to take a look at the executive summary and go through these inventory results, but recognize you might not have a lot of time to do that or desire. So if we come down to the appendices, this is where it gets really interesting. You can actually see the survey questionnaire itself if you would like. It's quite long. These are the pieces that I'm most interested in down here. All right, so there's a statewide summary page, and then there are district pages that are going to tell you about the technology that's available at each of the school districts. Okay, so I'm going to jump us down to page 71 really fast. And here we are magically on page 71, so we can get into the statewide summary pages. I'm going to spend just a couple of minutes looking at this data with you so that I'm sure that we're all interpreting it in the same way. All right, so as I come down a little bit, we're looking at Utah public schools. That means all school districts and charter schools, not private schools, okay? Looking at that, we can see how many students that is. 665,000 students across the state of Utah in our school system. 1,000 schools, 41 school districts, and then our charter schools, again, are separate from the school districts, and there are 142 charter schools as of this report. So what we're going to be looking at is what we got in the 2015 report and now what we're seeing in the 2017 report. And I fully anticipate that these numbers will continue to increase for the 2019 report, which we haven't seen yet. So you can see that there was a dramatic increase in the number of computing devices available across the state. And these numbers that we're seeing, when we look at 0.84, that means that there's not quite one device per student. Okay, so if we see that bar of one device per student right there, we're a little bit below that across the state. And of course, this is an average, so we're going to see more at some schools and fewer at others. Okay, but across the state, we have an average of 0.84 devices per student, which means not quite one for every student in our school system. All right, as we scroll down, we can see what kinds of computing devices are being used in those schools. And as we look at that, you can also see on the right-hand side the change in the number of that type of device. So we can see that the number of desktop computers has dropped dramatically in the last 2 years. The number of laptop computers has gone down. Number of desktops that are Macs have gone down. Laptops that are Macs have gone down. This is the number to pay a lot of attention to. In this state, as of 2017, there were 266,878 Chromebooks in the hands of students. Notice the increase here. So almost all of those were purchased in the time between 2015 and 2017, and that is largely due to the introduction of new legislation and funding that was specifically targeted at getting more computing hardware in the schools. So we saw a huge jump in purchasing specifically of Chromebooks during that time period. A large increase in the number of Windows tablets as well. Android tablets went down, and a large increase in the number of iOS tablets or iPads in that time as well. So I'm going to spend just a minute talking about that. Chromebooks, for those of you who aren't familiar with them, are basically, they look like laptops on the outside, but they don't function quite the same. So a Chromebook is basically not usable unless you have an internet connection. They've basically taken the Chrome web browser and turned it into an operating system, but it still needs the web, right? So it's a great tool for students who are going to use Google Apps for Education, who are going to use websites, and there are some apps that can also be downloaded for use on the Chromebook. We cannot, however, download big software packages like Adobe or Microsoft Office or those kinds of things, and they're really not meant for saving files on either. They generally have very low storage capacity. So it's really meant to be a way to access the internet and save things on the cloud, okay? They're very inexpensive. They average, most of the models that the local school districts are buying, they average between $200 and $300 a piece. So that's a huge savings over a laptop, which can cost anywhere from $500 to $2,000 per laptop. The tablets are generally being used in just two kinds of instances. One is for kids in kindergarten through about second grade. So before they learn how to use a keyboard, they're using touchscreen tablets, and that makes a lot of sense. We also see tablets generally being used for specialty kinds of uses. So I see a lot of tablets in fine arts classes, for example, art in particular, but also in music and some of our other fine arts, dance, etc., as well as physical education, because we can use them to take video and do some slow motion capture and things like that. And then there's some specialty apps for subjects like science and things like that. So we'll occasionally see tablets being used in those disciplines. But more and more I'm seeing Chromebooks being used across the board, starting at about 3rd grade. So if you've never used one of those before, definitely take any opportunity you can get to get your hands on a Chromebook and experiment with it. All right, we're also seeing that the Wi-Fi access points went up dramatically between 2015 and 2017. Again, that's due in large part to that legislation and funding that was able to help support schools in building up their infrastructure. Now, when we get into how old the equipment is, it does get a little concerning on occasion. So statewide, the average age of our wired gear is kind of old. So we can see that this bar right here, this 41%, is 4+ years old. And in technology time, that's kind of a long time. So we want to see it more in the red as much as we can. Same thing with the wireless gear. The red side is going to be the younger technologies. So it'll just be more functional. It'll work more functional, It'll work with more apps, those kinds of things. All right, scrolling down, you can see kind of the number of employees and others that are helping to make technology happen. And that can get really interesting as you look at different schools and different school districts and things like that. And then how they're actually being used. So you can see that most of the technology is on a cart for in-classroom use only. We do have some schools that deploy on a one-to-one basis, meaning that the students use a single device that is checked out to them throughout the day. And our definition of one-to-one is changing at this point, but that's the definition that they used. And a very small percentage of students, looking over here, that are able to take their devices home. So we see that in Park City and Wasatch, in particular, where the kids actually have a device assigned to them that they take home. Okay. Notice only 2% are allowed to use their own personal mobile devices, and there are reasons for that that we'll discuss as we go. All right, this is where I get a little concerned as we look at the educational software tools that are being used in Utah schools. Most of them are not creative. They're not allowing the students to really gain strong digital literacy skills for making things. It's really productivity kinds of things. So Google Apps for Education generally is going to be things like typing Google Docs, making Google Slides presentations, those kinds of things, similar to Microsoft Office. So you see both of those being used very widely. Microsoft Office is starting to go down a little bit. So I'm not super happy about that. Of course, I want students learning to type and learning to make presentations, but I'd love to see more creative uses of technology on this list, and I hope we're moving in that direction. And then you can see kind of the software needs that teachers have reported. So I encourage you to come into these sections and take a look and kind of try to figure out what you think it means. The rest of your time in this report, I want you to spend in these school district one-pagers. And this is where it gets really interesting as we start to compare districts to each other and to the state averages. So as you scroll down, the very first one you're going to come to is Alpine School District, which is the one where UVU is situated. It's the biggest district in the state with over 82,000 students, now over 83,000 students, and a lot of schools that they're working with. So I want you to notice here that they've only got one device for every 2 students, at least as of 2017, in Alpine School District, well below the state average. And the reason for that is they're just too big to be able to finance that many devices that quickly. Okay, so you can kind of see what's happening in each district. Notice too that it tells you in this top district facts section whether it's an urban or a rural district. And what I want you to do is go through this report, find some different urban and rural districts. You can do a Command F or a Control F to search the document if you want to look at specific districts. But I want you to compare several urban and several rural districts to see what technology they have access to and what they're using, to start making some comparisons and thinking about equity issues across our state.